Hi everyone, I wanted to make a quick video to cover something I think everybody struggles with in the beginning, MLA in-text citations. So I pulled out 3 different examples from the Purdue OWL website, and I want to just walk you guys through where everything should go so that as you continue on this session, it becomes second nature, and you can always go back to this video and use it as a resource. So let's check out example number 1, when the author is mentioned in the sentence. So I keep stressing how important it is to not let your quotes stand alone as their own sentences. You don't want to just plop them in. You have to use signal phrases and make sure that you introduce that quote and weave it in smoothly into your full complete sentence. So here we have a good example of this. The student writer begins her work with Wordsworth stated that romantic poetry was marked by a, quote, spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, end quote. So before we even get into the citation, notice the smooth introduction here. That signal phrase shows us who the author is, she frames the quote, and then we get the direct quote in the end, rather than just, boom, here's the quote, and then I'm just going to move on. So we have that smooth signal phrase, and this is a good example to study if you ever wonder, how am I going to introduce my quote? How can I do that? What's a good example to look at? Well, here's one right here. So we also need to keep in mind that she uses the author's last name in her sentence. So now we're going to jump down to the citation at the very end, and you'll see after the quotation mark, we have our parenthesis, followed by the page number, end the parenthesis, and then close out with the period. So I didn't have to include the author's last name inside the citation here because I already mentioned his last name in the signal phrase. The other thing I want to point out is notice where the period is. Sometimes students try to jam it over here. It seems like that's where it should go because that's the end of the quote, but actually you're going to wait till after your full citation, included at the very end after that parenthesis. So I mentioned the author's last name in the signal phrase. Now in my citation, all I need is the page number, not the last name. And also notice there are no letters like PG, period, 263. It's just the page number, the numbers. Let's take a look at a different example, number 2, when the author is not mentioned in the sentence. So we're still going to see a smooth signal phrase where the author introduces her quote, but we don't get the author's last name here. So romantic poetry is characterized by the, quote, spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, end quote. Again, we don't have that quote just plopped down by itself. That would really make the flow of our writing kind of stop, right? It's hard to get through that. It jams things up, and we want to make sure that we're smoothly integrating those quotes into our sentences with these signal phrases. This is another great example. We don't have our author's last name in it, so here in the citation, we have to include Wordsworth, followed by the page number, and then again we close out with that period at the very end. So one quick thing to point out, notice we have the last name here. We don't have a comma in between the last name and page number though, and we don't have PG, period, or the paragraph, or any of that. It's just the last name, followed by the page number, close it all out with the period. So there's an example where we don't have his last name in the signal phrase. We have to include it in the citation. We need to make sure we know who the author actually is. This will become especially important when you're working with more than one source. Your writer, or rather your readers, especially when not mentioned in the signal phrase, will have to know what author you're citing from. So make sure if you don't mention the author's last name in the signal phrase, it's included in the citation. One last example I want to show you is a paraphrase. So here, instead of directly quoting, I'm using the author's ideas, I'm rephrasing them in my own words, but I have to show my readers that they didn't come from me. I have to show ownership of these ideas and make sure that I'm giving credit to the author. So here we go. Wordsworth extensively explored the role of emotion in the creative process. Now, I didn't come up with that. This is Wordsworth's idea, and I need to make sure that my readers know that. So I'm going to give credit down here, even though there's no direct quotation marks, right? We don't see any direct quote, but it's still Wordsworth ideas put into my own words. So I have to include that citation at the end with the page number at the very end. Again, I don't have to include the last name because I mentioned his name in the signal phrase. So that's a paraphrase moment. Always, always make sure your readers know what ideas came from you and what ideas came from your authors. And in this case, it becomes a little tricky because there's no direct quote, but it's still Wordsworth's ideas. I just put them in slightly different words. have to show ownership here with the citation. So hopefully this makes things a little clearer how everything should look with your in-text citations, and you can always go back to this video as needed for a review.